guys. Well, as you know, lately I've been digging these 357 Magnum revolvers, and we've talked quite a bit, obviously, about this Colt Trooper, and recently picked up this Smith & Wesson Model 66, which is a K-frame stainless steel version of the 19. And I've been very impressed with this firearm. Been impressed with this one too. Really like the trigger and the shootability of the Smith & Wesson, how nice and tight she locks up, and all of those kind of things. And kind of had it in my mind I'd like to pick up the 19 at some point. And even though both of these firearms look like they're in, put them in a glass case condition, I've got them all polished up. They're shooters for me. I've done a video recently comparing both of these called 357 Magnum shooting. Anyway, really wanted to get a 19 and didn't know under what circumstances I'd get one. I didn't want to get one with the internal lock. I wanted to get an older one, and as a shooter, something to shoot the heck out of. And today I found just that. This is a Smith & Wesson Model 19-5. We'll show you what that means specifically in a minute. And this one's been around. I was not expecting to buy this. I went to a gun show today and started talking to a guy about my Model 28-2, which, although is in really good condition and is somewhat of a sought-after gun, at the same point in time, I just don't shoot it a lot. It's just not a fun gun to shoot. I don't like the trigger on it that much, and doggone cylinder on it's so heavy. So I said, hey, would you do a trade straight up? He said, bring it in. I did, and while some of you might say this wasn't a trade I should have made, this is a excellent firearm. It's in very good condition. It's got a nice hammer mounted firing pin on it, the trigger just like you'd want it. It's just perfect. The only real issues that we're going to find with this firearm are it's kind of scratched up, and I'll show you here in particular. This is before I've cleaned it up or anything, but it's got some bad on it right there, and we're gonna try to buff some of that out and see what we can do with that. But the truth of the matter is she's a little beat up, but I buy guns to shoot. I don't buy them to not shoot and to have. And so that's why I was willing to trade that 28-2, even though to some people that might be worth more than what this is. To me, as a guy who's going to shoot it, it's not, because I will shoot the heck out of this. I love shooting those 6-inch 357 Magnums. And so there you go. I really like the 28-2 from a looks standpoint and from a collectability standpoint, but unfortunately, I'm not really a collector. I'm a shooter. And because of that, I did enjoy working on the gun and making some different changes with the stocks, but from a shooting standpoint, I didn't really enjoy it. So while it was nice to have in the collection, it wasn't going to get shot a lot. So I thought the best thing to do would be to find a way to get a gun that I would shoot a lot in exchange. The 19-5 was manufactured between 1982 and 1988. This is the first model of this to not have a pin barrel or a recessed cylinder. Pretty much everything else was the same. Good source of this information. This came from Wikipedia. If you want to learn about the different dash versions, that's where you go. We're going to talk about this a little bit today, and we're going to get her cleaned up and take a look at it under the hood, so to speak, and see what we can do. All guns that have been around for 20, 30, 40 years, like the one on the top, are going to have their challenges cosmetically. It's just life. Unless it was something that was never shot. And typically the guys that buy those firearms, typically those are the guys that want more money than I'm going to pay for it. So I buy guns to shoot. So that's how this one right here ends up in my safe, and quite frankly might be something that rides around with me in my truck. So stay tuned. So as you can see, finish wise, we're a little bit challenged. Well, it's nothing we can't deal with. Mainspring's in good shape. We'll tighten this down, make sure nobody's messing around with the strain screw. The frame's in good shape. It's that square butt. Square butt K-frame. We did take a look down the barrel and it is nice and clean. I think where we're going to see how beat up this guy is right here. And that is a little bit of surface rust. And we will have nothing to lose by taking some flits and just polishing out some of this. It's not gonna shine like a mirror like my 586, but we can definitely improve this with some cleanup. Parts that matter are in good shape. So we will have some work to do. So kind of per earlier videos, especially with these older K-frames in 357, we want to make sure we don't have any cracking or barrel erosion. We do not. Right after they stopped doing the pin barrel and recessed cylinders, I think that's a really cool way to make a firearm, but at the same point in time, I'm not overly enamored with it. You can see here, this is a forged part with a hammer mounted firing pin. See, like I said, a little bit of rust. It's not a big deal. Looks like it could use a little bit of lube in there. In terms of comparing, this is the Model 66, which is the same gun in stainless, a newer version with a frame mounted firing pin. All else is pretty much the same. The stocks are a bit challenged. Really need to make up my mind how much work I want to put into this. This is not going to be a showpiece. These are not interchangeable with the 66. The 66 is a round butt, which means instead of having this square corner, it kind of just drops down and rounds off a little bit. So it's not interchangeable with the model of 66 I have. It is interchangeable with the Model 10 that is kind of a project gun I'm currently working on. We'll have more on that probably next week. But as you can see, it might be that we just need to start with some Murphy's oil soap. Give these a good cleaning and see what we have. I don't know if I want to sand these down and refinish them, or if I just, like I said, might decide to just use this as a bit of a working man's gun and not get too worried about how pretty she looks. We'll find out. It's not going to be a museum piece when I'm done, and I'm not going to get it reblued. So stocks are available. Now, I've mentioned before, you want to be real careful with flits on blued surfaces. Well, in this case, I hope it does tear into this a little bit. I mean, this is just, as you can see, it's really scratched up. We really want to get down to the nitty-gritty on this, and you know, where there's rust, it's not like I've got anything to hurt here. So you can see, barrel's looking pretty good after using the flits. We've still got some spots that need a little bit more treatment. That being one of them. A little bit right there, and then right here in back of the trigger guard. And so what we're going to do with that is we're going to get some 4/0 steel wool, a little bit of Rem oil, and we're going to work to gently get anything that looks like rust off of here. I think it was Bob Dylan who famously said, when you got nothing to lose. And So I'm being a little bit aggressive with this steel wool on this, because what do I have to lose? You can see the scratches that are there are there. And what I really want to do is where you see the darker brown rust spots, I just want to eradicate that as much as possible before we wax this guy up. But like old Robert Zimmerman said, when you got nothing to lose. So this is actually a lot more enjoyable than trying to buff out a little mark on an otherwise unblemished firearm that you get uptight about. Not this guy. This guy's going to be a workhorse. I had somebody ask me the other day, do I take off the cylinder latch when I'm doing a clean and polish job? And the answer is yes. Otherwise, it's damn near impossible to work around that. And it's not a big deal. You should not Loctite that on or anything like that. Just a good hand tighten will do it. But here we're ready. We're ready to go ahead and apply some wax. And in the case of this firearm, yeah, it'll make it shinier, but I really want to protect these areas where I've worked away the rust. And the rust actually is, protecting the bare metal underneath. So, now we're talking about a situation we need something to keep that from happening again and protect the bare metal. And wax is good, oil's good, something's good to get it in there. But you can see we've worked away where there was rust and didn't make those scratches any worse, that's for sure. Okay, so how are we doing on nice and shiny? We're doing better. We're doing better. My favorite new product I've been using, this Renaissance, did a really good job. Cleaning up what it could. If there was a decent surface to work with, it did great. When there was not a decent surface to work with, you can't give me rocks and I give you back diamonds. I can just give you maybe a little bit better polished rocks, but outside of getting a new blue job, this is about as good as it's going to get. I don't know what the hell scratched up there or what happened there, but that's a gun tragedy for sure. But some of the areas where you had some surface rust, we were able to get that out. Had some fingerprints here more than anything, but roll mark intact, as well as my thumbprints. But these are the forged parts. They're not MIM that everybody gets so uptight about. That started with later models, but as you can see, we have this looking better. We're gonna do what we can for these stocks and put it back together and see what we got. Alas, I think I like this better as what it really is, which is kind of a beater gun. I know that I can get this reblued probably for as cheap as $250. I could get a hot blue job on this. I don't know, for me that takes kind of the fun out of it. I'm not looking to show this off in a museum, nor am I looking to show this off in a museum. Neither of them. Both are examples of a 6-inch sidearm 357 Magnum, 6-shot, classic form, double action revolver. This one is from the 80s. This one was made in the 70s, but same here, guys. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if I don't like the 19 better, just in terms of how much I like this better in terms of the trigger. Now, this does look like something you could stick in a museum. And all this is a stainless version of this guy right here. That's all it is. But for me, I've come to a realization about these pistols. If I'm going to collect these things, and when I say collect them, buy them and shoot them, And if I find that I'm not shooting them, they will leave my safe. Case in point being the 28-2, fine gun, but there's a reason they quit making them. If I'm going to find myself buying these kind of firearms and I want to get the older ones, in the case of Smith & Wesson, the pre-internal lock. You know, great if I can get forged versus MIM, hammer and trigger and stuff like that. Not as big a deal to me as it is to some other guys. You know, the recessed cylinders I like, but it's certainly not a deal breaker to me, and it doesn't affect the function of the gun at all. I do prefer a hammer mounted firing pin to a frame mounted firing pin, but that's not a deal breaker to me either. What I get a little bit more alarmed about is my affinity for Colts, and you've seen the newest Colt I got, which is the baby brother to this Mark III. I got the 4-inch version. You know, I'm already needing to go in and replace the hammer spring because somebody lightened it up too much and it's not performing well in double action. Well, that's not a big deal, but if I need anything else done on this, I probably got a problem. And one of the reasons I went to the gun show today is I knew they'd have some of these, and I wanted to compare just by handling them. You know, how does it compare on the hammer pull? How does it compare on end shake on the cylinder? Things like that. And what I was finding is it reaffirmed what I said yesterday. I've got way too light a spring on the 4-inch MK3. This is just another great trigger by Smith & Wesson. Great in double action, real easy to cycle. Single action, real easy pull as well. And I like that. So, you know, nowadays to have your trigger function like that out of the box, you have to go to their pro shop and pay extra money and all that kind of stuff. Heck, this might be a better gun than what's coming out of their pro shop, and this was just their run-of-the-mill 19 in the 80s. Whatever the case may be, I'm finding that if I'm going to buy these kind of firearms, if I'm going to be in that kind of world, my choices are get mint stuff that's never been fired or rarely been fired and pay an arm and a leg for it, and like the fact that it looks all purty and doesn't look like it's been fired, and you know, you can polish them up real nice and take pictures and you can show them next to the guys that are showing Colt Pythons and stuff like that. Or you know, depending on what your value proposition and your price point is, you're going to run into stuff like this, or you're going to run into stuff like this that has, you know, the closer you get, you see that it's had some of the same challenges. It's an older firearm. So be prepared if you want to enter this arena. Be prepared to get used to doing stuff like using Renaissance wax. Get used to doing stuff like using the flits. Get used to doing stuff like taking them down and cleaning them. I'm not talking about taking the side plates off. You know, that's probably not a good idea for most of us. But, you know, if you need to do something with a hammer spring, if you need to learn how to look inside a barrel with a light, that's one thing that you want to do. I strongly recommend, if you don't have the ability to do that, if you don't have a light like this, something that you can do some close inspection. If you don't have that, you're probably setting yourself up to buy something where you got rust where you don't want it. Speaking of rust where you don't want it, you need to be able to learn how to look down these barrels, and you ought to see some defined grooves cut in the rifling. You ought to be able to see, you know, do you have a spot that looks like rust? Do you have something that might be an issue which is going to affect the trajectory of your bullet? Do you have issues with the crown? This one looks pretty good. So there you have it. The stainless and the blued. In this case, the formerly shiny blued and currently somewhat serviceable blued. Model 19, the Model 66. These are both in 357 Magnums. These are both firearms that are definitely built for a little bit more accuracy. These 6-inch barrels, I know a lot of guys take them hunting. The dealer I bought this from had taken this hunting this last hunting season. And so you could see that he believed it was a great shooter. It was great at function, and he didn't mind if it got a little beat up because it wasn't a cosmetic superstar. I think we can all agree to that. But I made the comment earlier about be careful what you buy on the internet, because you know somebody can really crank down the light, so to speak. It can show you a picture that looks like this, and all you see is the shiny. You don't see the detail. And even with a little bit closer inspection, you still don't see the detail. As much as I've wanted to buy some stuff I've seen on Gunbroker, get a little bit leery, because I know how easy it is to make a gun with issues look not so good. Now, like I said, we don't really have a lot to hide on this one. This is a pretty much a flawless finish, but this one right here, even at this distance, you really can't tell. What you do see is the shiny, and I can move the light around, and it's like, ooh, look at that barrel. Doesn't that look nice? As opposed to emphasizing the negative. So just something to think about, guys, when you're looking at firearms on the internet, a used firearm. You might want to ask for more pictures. Best thing to do is ask for close-ups. I suppose you can't get in and actually tell them what kind of light you want. But here you can see that if you thought you were getting an almost flawless gun and that showed up at your FFL, you'd probably be disappointed. Might wanting to return it. Maybe you get your money back, but you're feeling like you wasted your money because you thought that the whole firearm looked like this. So food for thought. So a few other things to look at. I talked about, why do I like the function of this gun? Why did I buy it for that reason? You can see absolutely no back and forth end play, no slop at all from that dimension, which is very important. You've got a nice tight gap between the cylinder and the forcing cone, and very, very good lockup. Is it without any wiggle at all? No, and it shouldn't be. Best revolvers are going to have some, but the trigger itself is amazing. That's in double action. And what I want you to do, and this is when you're dry firing, if you're using snap caps or not, look at the end of my barrel and look when I fire in double action how it's not moving. That's how you practice, guys. Guys that say I can't fire in double action, it's a terrible double action trigger, probably don't know double action triggers, and they're comparing it to maybe that 1911 they shot, or their Glock that the striker fired, or something like that. And that's not how these work. So it's about a practice kind of situation. It's about knowing where it's going to break. You can see right here, the difference between that and single action is very minimal. Very minimal. So you have the ability to take your time, and you know when it's going to break. Okay. Now some guys will say, well, gosh, what are you doing dry firing? Well, I'm dry firing a little bit. If I was going to sit here and hammer away, I would definitely put some snap caps or some empty, some spent 357 Magnum shells in it. But point of the matter is this firearm, I can tell from a trigger standpoint and from the condition of the barrel and knowing the guy who sold it to me, that it's going to be a real nice shooter. And it kind of fits in that category of, hey, I can take this, throw it in a cheapo holster, take it around with me in the truck, and have this available as a hunting firearm, and not be worried about, oh man, am I gonna bang up my my pretty Altamont stocks? you know, am I gonna get scratches on this pretty shiny surface? And actually, I wouldn't really worry about that myself in these, because I can replace the stocks and it's stainless. You can buff stuff out, but I might think twice before I go out with this Colt Trooper, which is a little bit on the less replaceable side, and getting more so every day. And the biggest thing is the people that can and will work on these are not nearly as available as the folks that can and will work on Smiths. You know, I could send this into Smith, and Smith is going to work on this firearm, even though it's 30-something years old. They'll work on this firearm for me. It's not under warranty, because it would be if I was the original owner. We don't know who the original owner is. This right here, if I send this to Colt, they're going to send it back, because Colt no longer works on this model firearm. So you have to kind of think about that stuff. If you're going to be a user of firearms, if you're going to collect them, if you're going to be the guy that, you know, throws his gun picks up on Facebook and says, hey, check it out, man, and you're never going to fire them, or maybe putting your obligatory, 25 rounds a year through them, we're not speaking the same language here. Again, to those guys who think I might be nuts for giving up that 28-2, which was in almost pristine condition, for a firearm like this, which certainly is not, from a value standpoint, yeah, there's 19s out there. This one's in great functional shape, which that got my attention. But the biggest thing was I wasn't shooting the 28-2. And I don't have room in my gun safe for firearms I'm not going to use. The 28-2 is a big, heavy end frame. It's got some nostalgia to it. And if you are a collector, which I'm not, I'm a shooter. If you're a collector, you don't want to let go of that 28-2. If you're a shooter and you're somebody looking for something that you are going to shoot and that you're going to enjoy shooting, then you made the right deal if you did this. I know I did. I don't think I made a mistake picking up this Model 19 from Smith & Wesson. I've been a guy that ever since I picked up the Model 66 really wanted to have its blued brother. Nice pistols that are both Smith & Wessons. They're both pre-locks, and they're both great shooters, and that's exactly what I'm going to do with them. This is Dr. Drake 63 thanking you for watching today, and again, appreciate those of you that subscribe. I'm flattered, and I'm humbled. Take care.